So we all want to look good, and running definitely helps us achieve that goal. But there is a point where losing fat will hurt your performance. So I'm going to show you exactly what to do to keep your performance high while losing fat as a runner. So in this video, we're going to go over a tool that's going to help you calculate your numbers for fat loss so that you can maintain your performance while losing fat in a systematic way. And stick around to the end of the video because I'll give you a chance to get this tool for yourself and how to implement it into your own training. So the process of losing fat is hard and it actually kind of sucks. But when you lose fat, that's great. But going through it is hard and it's difficult, especially when your training is high and you can be in the middle of some sort of training session. If you have a marathon coming up, a half marathon coming up, an obstacle course race event. And so it's hard to kind of balance between the two of them because at a certain point, having less fat will improve your performance as an endurance athlete. But there also a time where not eating enough will be detrimental to your performance, even more than that fat loss could benefit it. So there is a really tricky balance here that you have to kind of toe to get the optimal results while losing fat. And there are a bunch of ways to kind of lose fat in the short term, and that's a lot of times it becomes these fad diets. Maybe you've tried intermittent fasting, maybe you've tried keto, even something like plant-based diet, or whatever it is that you've done that has helped take off fat in the short term. But we're looking for long-term growth here and long-term progress. So it really boils down to how much energy you're expending versus how much energy you're taking in. And a lot of times these fad diets are very much about restriction, even if it is a diet that isn't saying to even count how much you're taking in or to consider calories at all. Usually they're eliminating something in your diet that is going to drastically reduce the amount of calories you are taking in, and that's why you see such good fat loss results. And for you as an athlete, as a runner, as an endurance athlete, it's not just about losing the weight, it's about losing that weight while performing well. And a common problem that often happens is undereating for the endurance athlete. We aren't quite sure how much energy we are expending, and we're just kind of going off of the general public's recommendations for how much to eat, and that puts us in a really low spot. And if we continue to eat less and less, we will ultimately turn into a plateau for our fat loss, and we'll perform poorly, we will not lose fat, and we will be set up for more of a binge on the back end. So because we're really hungry, there's this ups and downs that happen where we are in a big deficit, and then we are in such a tough spot because of hunger that we eat way too much. So this really is another challenge that we have as endurance athletes when maintaining fat loss for the long term. And usually a common solution for that is just to dive a deficit even lower because you're not losing fat at the amount that you're eating currently. So why don't we just keep it going down so you can find a place where you will eventually lose those stubborn pounds. But again, this is just going to set you up for poor performance and burnout. So we really want to make sure that we mitigate that so you can perform your best and look your best. And it really shouldn't be about how little you can eat. It should be how much you can eat while losing fat. So that's really what comes into play with how much energy you are expending, and then taking that total number and reducing your calories and your macronutrients based off of your training. So here's a tool that I use for myself and for the athletes that I coach that will help you find exactly how much you should eat to fuel your performance and also to create a fat loss deficit. So here is the macro calculator that that I use for myself and for the athletes that I coach who are either wanting to fuel their performance or lose fat. So you have the option to use both. I found that athletes should typically kind of stay in an 8-week range for fat loss before it really starts to lead into burnout. You can typically sustain the 12 weeks if you're not at a high level of activity, but after about 8 weeks for an endurance athlete is kind of the point that I've found that people kind of push back mentally about it. So again, this is completely anecdotal, and you should go on your own to figure out what you are going to want in terms of how long you want to push out the fat loss. So in this calculator, I have my own metrics lined up here. So there are a couple of different things you're going to want to go over. So again, just your age and years, your height, your weight, gender, your work activity, which is very important. So your work activity is what you're doing on your day-to-day. So if you have a desk job, light active, moderately active. So typically I'm moderately active. And in this case, if I want to lose fat, I'll click on that lose fat button. But let's just keep it as improved performance for now, just so we can see the total caloric outcome. Mesomorph has more this part is more to do with how much, what kind of body type you are. So if you're a hard gainer, it means that you don't add weight easily. If you're an easy gainer, it means you do gain weight easily. And mesomorph is kind of both. So if you can adjust your training. So if you're training hard, you'll lose weight. If you're eating a lot, you'll gain weight. So I'm kind of in that category there. This bottom part is more for the meal timing. This is completely up to you to use and when you kind of work out. So for me, I'm typically around lunch hours. And how many meals you eat a day, I'm around 6, anywhere from 4 to 6. And then the real thing we need to focus on are the miles run, miles biked, and the strength training hours. So say in a typical day, I'm gonna run about maybe 6 miles and do an hour of strength training. And in this case, it's going to adjust my total calories from carbohydrates, fats, and protein. So on a typical day like this, where I'm moderately working or moderately walking around, and I am running about 6 miles, my total caloric expenditure is going to be about 3,000 calories. And where this comes from is the number of, and so where this comes from is taking the amount of calories that you burn based on your body weight and the activity that you're doing. So for running, it's about 1.6, it's about kilometers run and times your body weight in kilograms, and that will pretty much equal out the total calories that you're going to expend. Biking is that same formula, only times 0.4, so it's a little bit less, a little bit more energy efficient. And strength training is going to be your hours lifted times your body weight times 1.5. So it's going to be dramatically lower. And in that case, for strength training, that is more like sets and reps. So if you're going into the gym and doing 3 sets of 10 of back squat or something, with rest in between, that's the kind of strength training I'm talking about. High intensity strength training at like a studio fitness class, like an Orange Theory or a Barry's Boot Camp, that's more along the lines of cardio. So you'd want to take your total time spent doing high intensity interval training, and then you would want to convert that into essentially miles run. So if you do 20 minutes of high intensity training and you typically run 10-minute miles, that would be about 2 more miles that you would add into your running. So let's just say that's, for my sake, that's something that happened. So this turned into an 8-mile day, and say I did 15 minutes of some other strength stuff, which is going to change my caloric expenditure. So still around 3,000 calories. So now that's my total energy expenditure. So to find a caloric deficit, we're going to want to take about 500 calories off of your daily total. And the best way to do that is to split those evenly between your carbohydrates and your fats. You want to keep your protein high, especially in a caloric deficit, to help spare that muscle mass. And we don't want to lose muscle mass when we're in fat loss phase, because that's counterintuitive for performance and also for body composition. So if you are in a big caloric deficit and your protein's really low, you'll start to strip muscle mass away from yourself, and you'll look worse and you'll perform worse. So that protein needs to stay high, right around 1 gram per pound of body weight. So that's going to stay constant all the way through, especially for an endurance athlete. You need to make sure that stays up. So for the sake of this calculator, you just want to go over to the goal and from improved performance to lose fat. So right away, you'll see your carbohydrates drop quite a bit. That took about 250 calories, 300 calories or so off of my total expenditure. And then you're going to want to change your work activity to the one right below. So I'm going to go from moderate to light activity, which is going to change my fat numbers. And this is going to help split things evenly so that I'm not dipping too far down in fat and too far down into carbohydrates. If we restrict carbohydrates, that's really going to hurt our performance. As endurance athletes, the carbs are what's going to fuel your performance the most, and most of the time your main energy source will be carbohydrates, unless trained otherwise. So if we take all of that away from our training, if we take carbohydrates out of the picture completely, yes, it will put us in a massive caloric deficit, but it's also really going to hurt your total energy, and your runs will feel worse, and your recovery will be worse. And this is kind of attuned to what you would feel if you have done keto and you've done like the keto flu, or if sometimes you went low carbohydrate, you kind of feel just like you don't want to work out. And we do want to work out. We want to work out a lot, and we want to run fast. So we want to keep those carbohydrate numbers somewhere in an area that is not too low that it takes us out. And on the fat end, so for that respect, okay, it's like our primary fuel source is carbohydrates. So why don't we take everything from fat and just really make sure that we're hitting our caloric numbers and keeping those carbohydrates up if that's what's going to matter for performance. Fats are really important for hormone function and can take a nasty toll on things like your sleep, on your recovery, and just like your general mood. So if your fats get down too low, if they get down past a certain floor, you'll really feel awful and you'll perform worse and you just will like everything much less. So we want to make sure that these are well above your floor. And I like to be conservative on the fat intake just because a lot of times as runners, if we're running a lot of slow miles, we may use that fat as fuel quite a bit as well. So we want to make sure that we are dosing ourselves with fats and not letting that creep too low. So that's why we want to take an even mix between both of them. And that's why you want to change your work activity and the goals for losing fat. And that will give us an approximate number. So that for me, on a day like with an 8 mile day and like 20 and 15 minutes of strength training would be about 2,600 calories per that day. So say you have a long run, it's 14 miles, I do no strength training, that's going to bump up the calories here. So if we continue so you'll see a 14-mile run would be we would need about 600 carbs to fuel that performance. So if we didn't adjust our numbers based off of our activity, that would put us in a massive deficit, almost half the amount of carbohydrates that we would need. Because if we just continued to have these same numbers every single day, like yes, again, we would lose fat, we would be in a deficit, but we would reach that point of burnout and plateau much quicker. So we want to make sure we are undulating our caloric intake with the amount of work that we are putting in. So again, you can get this calculator for yourself. There is a link right below in the notes that you can download. It gets sent right to your inbox, and then just make a copy of it to have this for yourself and to work out in your training. So some other tips that I want to make sure that you are adding into while you're going into a fat loss phase would be your food volume. So your overall amount of food that you're eating is going to be less. So your hunger levels might go up, but also the habit of eating is also satiating. So just like the process of sitting down and eating and how much food is actually going in down into your digestive system can be a helpful trigger to make you feel less hungry. So how do you do that? Well, eating less. Well, the obvious answer is to eat more veggies. And a lot of times this can get lost when we are just looking at big macro numbers like carbohydrates and fats. Where vegetables are not dense in macronutrients, they are dense in micronutrients. So you can eat much more and not have that many calories pile up on top, so that your daily total it has to go down. So make sure you're eating veggies, make sure you're eating plenty of them. Anything that's green, almost I wouldn't even count toward these total numbers. Things like carrots, you'd have to maybe address a little bit because they're a little bit sweeter. Anything that's on that sweeter end on the vegetables, or of course any starch or anything like that, wouldn't count toward a green vegetable. But make sure you're eating a lot more vegetables to help curb that appetite. And also drinking water. A lot of times our hunger can be confused with our thirst. So if we're drinking, so always make that the first move. If you are hungry and you're feeling compelled to eat something to snack, drink some water first and be diligent about that. Drink copious amounts, aiming for about 100 ounces a day, I think is a fair place to start, and making sure that we're not thirsty all the time. And my third tip is just to plan your meals and making sure those are planned out and having a plan around your day-to-day eating. And this is kind of where the meal timing of things comes into play back on the calculator, so that you can take a look at how much you're going to eat and how often and frequency throughout the day. And then you can plan things accordingly. So if that means just simply journaling things out about what you're going to eat and when, or if it's actually planning it out, or having 2 or 3 options if you're a person who wants to be a little bit more spontaneous about what you are doing with your for your meals. And of course, logging your food. Logging your food is the best way to figure out how much of all these macronutrients are in each individual item of food. So, and there's really not going to be a way that you're going to find out where you're at in terms of these numbers if you're not logging your food. So download some sort of food tracker. MyFitnessPal is the most expansive and integrates with the most different apps and things like that. So that's a great place to start. It's pretty easy. You can figure that out as you go. And so I hope that is helpful. I think it has really been a game changer for me and a lot of athletes that I coach. help with their body composition, which ultimately will help with their performance without sacrificing too much in terms of their recovery and their fueling. So again, there is a link right below that you can get this calculator for yourself. Hit the link, download it, get it sent to your inbox, shoot me questions with anything you have. And before you leave, hit me with a subscribe and a thumbs up if you like this video, and hit that little bell right next to it just to get all of the newest videos that do come through Reinforced Running. Awesome. I will talk to you next time.